Welcome to Daily English Stories. Every story hides a world. Some inspire, some haunt, some stay forever. Chapter 1. The Curious Boy Who Dreamed Different. Steve Jobs entered the world in 1955, not in a hospital room filled with celebration, but in a moment of quiet uncertainty. His biological parents were young, unprepared, and unsure of what to do with a newborn child. They made a heartbreaking decision to give him up for adoption. That choice, born out of confusion and circumstance, would unknowingly set the stage for one of the most remarkable lives in modern history. The baby was adopted by a humble, working-class couple, Paul and Clara Jobs, who promised to love him as their own. They didn't have wealth or influence, but they had something far more valuable: warmth, patience, and integrity. In their small home in California, they gave Steve a foundation built not on luxury, but on love. Paul Jobs was a mechanic, a man who believed that anything worth doing was worth doing well. He taught his son how to take apart machines and put them back together again. It wasn't just about fixing things, it was about understanding them, seeing how every part connected to the whole. When you build something, Paul would say, make sure even the parts no one sees are beautiful. Those words became a silent principle in Steve's life, one that would echo through every Apple product decades later. Clara Jobs, gentle yet firm, balanced that toughness with tenderness. She nurtured Steve's mind, teaching him to read before he went to school, encouraging his endless curiosity. But young Steve was different, restless, sharp, and full of questions that few adults could answer. He was the kind of child who looked at a toy and wondered how it worked, not how to play with it. School, however, didn't understand him. Teachers found him distracted, rebellious, sometimes even troublesome. He questioned authority, challenged lessons, and refused to accept anything that didn't make sense to him. But underneath that defiance was a brilliant curiosity, a mind unwilling to settle for ordinary explanations. One teacher saw it and convinced Steve's parents to feed that hunger for learning rather than suppress it. At home, the garage became his first laboratory. Among scattered tools, wires, and old parts, he and his father spent countless evenings building and repairing radios and small machines. That space, dusty, cluttered, and filled with dreams, would later become the birthplace of Apple. As Steve entered his teenage years, the world around him began to change. California was transforming into a new frontier, not of gold or land, but of technology. Silicon Valley was buzzing with energy, filled with dreamers, inventors, and misfits who believed they could change the world from their garages. It was in this electric atmosphere that Steve met Steve Wozniak, or Woz, a kind, brilliant young man with a passion for electronics. Where Woz was shy and technical, Steve was bold and visionary. The two became inseparable, bound by a shared fascination with how machines could connect people. Woz built circuits. Steve imagined possibilities. Together, they dreamed of creating something that would bring computers out of laboratories and into homes. After high school, Steve enrolled at Reed College in Oregon. But within 6 months, he dropped out. It wasn't a lack of ambition, it was clarity. He realized he was spending his parents' savings on an education that didn't inspire him. Yet, even after leaving, he continued to attend classes that fascinated him, like calligraphy, where he fell in love with typography, spacing, and the beauty of letters. Years later, That artistic sensibility would define the elegant design of Apple computers. But the young man was searching for something deeper than knowledge. He wanted purpose. That search led him across the world, to India. Barefoot, curious, and spiritually hungry, he explored ashrams, meditated, and studied simplicity. He learned that true clarity doesn't come from what you own, but from how you think. When he returned home, thinner but wiser, his vision for life and creation had completely changed. Back in California, Steve reconnected with Wozniak. The two decided to take their ideas seriously. In the same garage where Steve once fixed radios with his father, they began building computers by hand. They had little money but endless faith. Every night, they worked with soldering irons, wires, and hope, building what would become the Apple I. They called their company Apple, simple, friendly, and human. It was a name that felt alive, unlike the cold, technical names of other computer companies. Steve wanted technology to feel personal, approachable, almost like art. Their invention caught attention fast. The Apple I led to the Apple II, a sleek and powerful personal computer that became a sensation. For the first time, ordinary people could own a computer. Not a machine locked in a university lab, but one that could sit on a desk in a home. It was a revolution in simplicity and accessibility. By age 25, Steve Jobs was worth millions, but money was never his true motivation. What thrilled him wasn't wealth. It was creation. He wanted to build products that made people feel empowered, that blurred the line between technology and humanity. He once said, "We're here to put a dent in the universe." And even in his youth, you could see he meant every word. Yet, deep down, Steve knew this was just the beginning. His mind was already chasing the next great idea. He wanted computers to be more than machines. He wanted them to be companions, tools of expression, bridges between human thought and possibility. The boy who once asked, "Why can't things be better?" was now changing the world by answering his own question. And though success had found him early, life was preparing him for even greater trial and even greater triumphs still to come. Chapter 2. The Fall That Changed Everything. By the early 1980s, Apple had become a symbol of creativity, innovation, and unprecedented success. The world marveled at how a young college dropout, working out of a small garage in California, had built a global company from scratch. Steve Jobs, with his relentless vision and unwavering determination, had turned a dream into a revolution. Yet behind the applause and the bright lights, storm clouds were gathering. Steve was brilliant, no doubt, but brilliance often comes with intensity. He was demanding, obsessive even, and pushed his team to their limits. Every detail mattered, every screw, every pixel, every line of code. Good was never enough. To Steve, it had to be insanely great. This uncompromising attitude inspired his team, but it also created tension. Some admired his genius, while others feared his perfectionism. Yet, Steve never wavered. He believed that extraordinary work required extraordinary effort, and he was willing to pay the price. Yet, while the world cheered, Apple's internal struggles grew. Steve's perfectionism, impulsive decisions, and intense personality began to clash with the company's board and management. He demanded excellence, often disregarding the rules and hierarchy, which frightened those who preferred order and predictability. The tension reached a breaking point. In 1985, the unimaginable happened. Steve Jobs was fired from Apple, the very company he had built with his own hands. The moment was devastating. Steve later admitted, "How can you get fired from a company you started?" The pain was deep, leaving him feeling betrayed and lost. But rather than succumbing to despair, Steve transformed his setback into a new beginning. He didn't see failure as the end. He saw it as an opportunity to start again, to think bigger, and to learn from his mistakes. Steve founded Next, a computer company focused on creating advanced machines for education and research. Though Next would never become a commercial success in the way Apple had, it introduced groundbreaking technology that would later power future Apple products. It was a laboratory of innovation, a place where Steve's ideas could flourish without compromise. He believed in learning through creation, and Next was his next step on that journey. At the same time, Steve purchased a small animation studio from George Lucas. This tiny studio, Pixar, seemed insignificant at first, but Steve recognized its potential. He invested time, money, and faith into the company, guiding it through early struggles. His vision was not merely to produce movies, but to tell stories that blended technology, creativity, and emotion. In 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated film. It was a massive success, marking a turning point not just for animation, but for Steve Jobs as a visionary. He was no longer just a computer genius. He was a storyteller, shaping entire industries. Meanwhile, Apple without Steve began to falter. The company lost its direction, struggled with unprofitable products, and faced mounting competition. The creative spark that had once defined Apple seemed to be fading. By 1997, Apple teetered on the edge of collapse. It was a company in need of salvation, a brand yearning for the visionary who had first set it on fire. Destiny intervened. Apple invited Steve Jobs back. His return wasn't motivated by revenge or ego. It was a mission to save the company, restore its vision, and rebuild its soul. Steve arrived not as the embattled young genius of the 1980s, but as a man tempered by failure, shaped by reflection, and guided by clarity. He immediately streamlined the company, refocused the team, and set a new tone of simplicity, discipline, and innovation. This return marked the beginning of one of the most extraordinary comebacks in business history. With renewed focus, Steve transformed Apple's culture, products, and philosophy. He had learned that true success was not just about creating technology, but about crafting experiences, telling stories, and inspiring people. The foundation he laid during these years would pave the way for the revolutionary devices that would soon follow: the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad. Steve Jobs' story during this period teaches us that failure is not fatal. It shows that being fired, being doubted, or being pushed aside can sometimes be the catalyst for growth, creativity, and reinvention. The fall that seemed catastrophic became the turning point that allowed him to return stronger, wiser, and more focused than ever. It was a lesson not just for entrepreneurs, but for anyone chasing a dream. Setbacks are not the end. They are opportunities to rise, to learn, and to leave an impact that lasts. Steve Jobs didn't just come back to Apple. He came back to change the world again. He proved that vision, resilience, and the courage to keep going can turn even the most painful failure into a story of triumph. Chapter 3. The Legacy of a Visionary. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, he came back not just as a man with a plan, but as someone who had been shaped by failure, patience, and reflection. He had seen what it meant to lose control, to be thrown out of the very company he had built, and to watch the world move on without him. But instead of bitterness, he carried clarity. He understood that true innovation came not from doing everything, but from focusing on what truly mattered. As he famously said, focus means saying no to 1,000 things. This philosophy became the foundation for Apple's next golden age. Steve immediately set to work. He simplified Apple's sprawling product line, cutting away the clutter and noise, and concentrated the team on a few products that could change the world. One by one, the ideas that seemed impossible were brought to life. The first was the iMac in 1998. It wasn't just another computer, it was a statement. Gone were the dull beige boxes that had filled offices for decades. Instead, Apple introduced a colorful, translucent machine that looked alive, vibrant, and fun. The iMac wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about experience. People didn't just use it, they loved it. The excitement surrounding the iMac reminded the world that Apple had returned and that creativity could once again thrive. But Steve's vision was bigger than computers. He understood that technology should empower people to express themselves, to explore, and to enjoy life. This belief led to the creation of the iPod in 2001, a small, elegant device that could hold thousands of songs. With the slogan, 1,000 songs in your pocket, Steve changed not only how people listened to music, but how they carried their lives with them. Suddenly, music became personal, portable, and intimate. It wasn't just a gadget. It was freedom, creativity, and joy wrapped in a sleek design. Apple became more than a company. It became a cultural icon, a symbol of possibility and imagination. Steve Jobs had a unique way of looking at products and at life. For him, design was not about appearances alone, it was about the soul of the experience. Every detail mattered. From the curve of a device to the sound it made, to the feel of it in the hand, everything was intentional. He believed that technology should be invisible in its brilliance, allowing people to focus on what they love to create, learn, and achieve. This obsession with quality and simplicity was often misunderstood by others, but it became Apple's hallmark. It was this perfectionism that allowed Apple to build products that were not only functional, but magical. In 2007, Steve took the stage in his signature black turtleneck and jeans and introduced the iPhone. The world watched in awe as he unveiled a device that was more than a phone. It was a music player, a camera, and a window to the internet, all in one elegant glass and metal package. People gasped, laughed, and cheered. The iPhone wasn't just a new product, it was a revolution. It changed the way humans interacted with technology, how they communicated, how they captured memories, and how they lived their daily lives. It was a perfect example of Steve's vision. Technology should empower, inspire, and make life simpler, not more complicated. Soon after, the iPad followed, initially met with skepticism. Why do we need a device between a phone and a computer? Critics asked. The iPad soon proved that Steve's intuition was unparalleled. It created a new category of devices, blending entertainment, education, and productivity seamlessly. People used it for reading, for work, for games, for learning, and for creating. Steve Jobs had done more than rebuild Apple. He had transformed the way the world approached technology, making it personal, human, and beautiful. Behind this brilliance, however, was a man facing his greatest challenge: his health. Diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2003, Steve fought a battle that he rarely let the world see. He experimented with alternative treatments, tried to protect his privacy, and yet, through it all, he continued to work tirelessly. Even in the face of mortality, he never lost focus, never lost his obsession with design, and never stopped inspiring those around him. In 2005, he gave the commencement address at Stanford University, sharing a message that would resonate across generations. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. Steve's leadership was unconventional. He was demanding, sometimes harsh, and often impatient. He challenged his team relentlessly, refusing to accept anything less than excellence. Yet, those who worked with him understood the brilliance behind his intensity. Steve didn't just build products, he built a culture of innovation, passion, and focus. He showed the world that true leadership was about vision, integrity, and the courage to push boundaries. Even in his final years, Steve Jobs was thinking about the future. He nurtured Apple's next generation of leaders, mentored young innovators, and ensured that the company's DNA of simplicity and creativity would endure. The launch of Siri in 2011, a voice-controlled digital assistant, showcased his belief that technology should adapt to humans, not the other way around. He wasn't just creating tools, he was shaping experiences, ecosystems, and possibilities. On October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. The world mourned the loss of a visionary, a creator, and a dreamer. Yet his legacy lived on, not just in Apple products, but in the way people think, innovate, and challenge the ordinary. Every iPhone, Mac, iPad, and Apple Watch carries a piece of his soul. His insistence on perfection, his belief in simplicity, and his dream that technology should serve humanity continue to influence millions. Steve Jobs taught the world that being different is not just okay. It is necessary. That passion, focus, and resilience can change not only a company, but the lives of countless people. His story is proof that challenges can be transformed into opportunities, that failure is not the end, but a lesson, and that one person's vision can change the world forever. Steve Jobs didn't just create products. He created a philosophy. He showed us that innovation is about heart as much as mind, that design is not just what we see, but what we feel, and that thinking differently can leave a mark on generations. His life reminds us that time is limited, dreams are fragile, and yet, with courage, creativity, and determination, a single person can make a difference that echoes for decades. The legacy of Steve Jobs is a story of vision, perseverance, and the extraordinary impact of believing in the impossible.